Okay, and then share screen. We'll back up a couple of frames here just to refresh my memory more than yours at this point. Because we've been talking about these fiery ministers, how the Israelites had this appearance of ministers of fire just because of all the fiery things that would occur, not just as they were moving the encampment, but as the encampment settled down, that all these things began to happen. And you can only imagine, if you were going to do a movie and you were going to write the screenplay for this movie with no words at all, if you could just help people to imagine, what it would have looked like for that many people following a cloud or following a pillar of fire. And apparently they could also travel at night because of the pillar of fire, which would make it much cooler. I don't know if being in the cloud affected the temperature, like maybe was it not as hot as it normally is in the desert at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But we do know that they did have the potential, if they followed the pillar of fire at night, that they could have traveled at night when it was much cooler. But these being mistaken as these celestial beings because of what the nations would have observed as the camp came to its resting place, how the ark would stop, the pillar of fire or cloud would stop, the people would stop, the water would gush out of the rock and start drawing the boundaries, the smoke, from the altar, that would be going up. You would already have this divinely lit fire. They couldn't see anybody lighting a fire because they didn't need to light a fire. It was divinely lit and it stayed lit. And so imagine, again, if you're uninitiated into how this camp works and how the presence of Adonai works, how terrifying the Israelites would have been as they observed supernatural fire. This synchronized movement to the movements of the fire. And so that just kind of helps us to understand again how terrifying the nations became of what they were seeing and how in some cases they misunderstood. Goes back to our discussion last week on what's the difference between Elohim and Elohim. Well, of course, Elohim with a big E is Elohim, the judge and creator, or the judge of creation. Elohim, small e, it can be a judge, it can be an appointed official, somebody appointed to do a particular thing. And in that sense is very much like the definition of an angel. An angel is a messenger, sent with a particular job. But once we know the difference between Elohim big E and Elohim small e, I think it really does help us to discern. Remember, we talked about what is our calling. Vayikra is the heart of the Torah. It has the holies in Vayikra because Vayikra means and called. Your calling is your purpose. And so knowing our purpose is always important. And in a sense, we are these fiery ministers of Elohim. This part they did not misunderstand. What the nations misunderstood as they looked on is they thought that somehow the Israelites had been transformed into celestial beings. They were not celestial beings. They were human beings. They were created beings. But yes, they were ministers of fire in terms of their calling and their purpose. If we go to Acts chapter 2, we are also ministers of fire. We are ministers of the Holy Spirit. And that is our calling. That is our purpose. And so understanding who Elohim is helps us, small e Elohim, to understand what it is we're appointed to do and how we are all sons of Elohim with the big E. It is our job to learn his word. It is our job to proclaim his word. It is our job to disciple others according to his word. But as we're walking in that purpose and that calling, we have to be very careful if we are ministers of fire that we're not drawn over a line, because there is an incredible power of the Holy Spirit that we're working with. Unfortunately, there's also an incredible power of the animal soul that can go to work in us, that can be activated. It can begin to like the power. It can begin to like authority. It can begin to like control. It can begin to like intimidating others. It can begin to like feeling righteous. There's no sense in feeling righteous. You're just called to be righteous, to learn what righteousness is and to try to walk in it. But so many times, this feeling of righteousness, it can cause us to cross some lines, because all of a sudden we begin to appropriate the awe, the reverence, the worship, the adoration that should have been directed toward the Holy One into ourselves. It becomes affirming for us. And that can get over again into sorcery. What is sorcery? It's tapping into a realm that doesn't belong to you. It's not under your authority, but nevertheless, you're trying to manipulate that authority to produce a particular reaction in other people. It might be admiration. You might be trying to get money out of them, esteem, those sorts of things. And so we have to be careful as we're walking as ministers of fire, we're walking in our holy calling, that we're not appropriating the authority and the reverence and all these other things that we know only Elohim, they belong only to Elohim, the Creator. They are our tools to use to further his purposes. They should never draw attention to ourselves. Angels never wanted that. If you try to worship an angel, he'll say, don't do that, stop that. Right? So we have to be very careful how we deal with admiration. If other people do perceive righteousness in us, that we sort through that as fast as we possibly can and make sure the glory goes back to the Holy One. Doesn't mean you can't take a compliment. You can say, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope I am being a faithful vessel of the Father. I hope you are seeing the Father in me. But in terms of liking that, we've all seen how that, and it seems like it's so difficult if we look at the religious world, especially the evangelical Christian world, you see men and women who start out with good hearts. They started out with a good purpose, but the adoration, the esteem, the gifts, and all those things that go along with being a fiery minister of the word, all of a sudden, they started to blur the lines. And it's hard to remain in that state of humility as a minister of fire. It really is. And so we have to be very conscious of that as we walk, that we, consider our position as a small e Elohim relative, or a son of Elohim, even children of Elohim, to the position of Elohim with the big E, the creator. We are always the created. And so we have to be careful about, taking admiration to ourselves that properly belongs to the one who created us. We also talked about purpose, how these angels will have particular principalities or powers assigned to them, and how important it is to stay in your lane. What is your calling? What is your purpose? Walk in that. Don't walk in something else. Don't walk in someone else's. We should earnestly desire the better gifts, but we should not envy one another's gifts. So it's just like this. We got an angel here in Revelation 14:18. He has power over fire. He came out from the altar. What if a different angel says, well, I want that power. I really like that. I really admire that. I think I'd like to do that. Well, they don't do that. And so they don't have problems. But because we do that, we have problems sometimes. But this altar fire, we see this particular angel who does have power over fire. An altar represents judgment. So you've got the name Elohim, and you've got an office of Elohim. Either way, whether you're talking about creator Elohim or whether you're talking the office of an Elohim, somebody with an assigned duty, an assigned principality or power, an assigned place of judgment, it's going to represent that quality of strict judgment. Because if those boundaries of creation weren't drawn with strict judgment, it would have very quickly degenerated back into chaos. In order for there to be life, there has to be strict boundary and judgment. And so that's why we see Elohim as the name of the creator. He had to set those boundaries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then boundaries within each of those days in order to preserve life at every level. Right. So what was the purpose of Israel in the wilderness? They weren't Elohim with a big E, but were they sons of Elohim? Were they called according to his purpose? Absolutely. And so that was the question that was assigned here to the settling down of the Israelite camp. And again, the verse we're working with is, who is this coming up from the wilderness? And the Midrash says, who are these people? Ask the nations of the world that all their actions are with fire. How is it that they rise with fire and descend with fire? The Holy One answers, these are whom on to rely, for they're perfumed with myrrh and frankincense and with every powder of the peddler. That is, they are descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about the powder of the peddler, the spices of the peddler, how that they represent the dust of Jacob, because powder there, it's dust, powder, same word, avaka. And showing the connection between that powder, the dust that was kicked up, and that struggle between Jacob and the man who turns out to be an angel, struggles with him all night. He kicks up some dust. They wrestle, avaka, play on word. But in that, they say that the dust was kicked up. And it showed up in the Torah portion last week. I don't know if you caught it in Balak, where it says, who can number the dust of Jacob? It goes back to the blessings that were placed upon the 12 tribes, his 12 sons. And so what is our calling? What is our purpose? Part of it's right here. Part of it is learning how to walk in the wilderness, so that when we come up from the wilderness, we can be identified as those who are perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, and with every spice, every dust of the peddler, that we are descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, so which brings us to today's lesson. Part of that awe that the nations observed as the camp settles down and you see all these fires doing their work, either settling down with the pillar, the pillar fire, or whether it's going to be the fire leaping up onto the altar, whether it's going to be the water that looks like fire starting to define the boundaries around the tribal encampments, all these things. Added to that, remember they said that there would be 2 darts of fire that would come between the staves of the altar, not the altar, between the staves of the ark, coming out from the Torah, the fiery Torah, and it would go throughout the camp and clear out the serpents and the scorpions. And it says even flying scorpions in the text. It would clear out those things, those killers of the wilderness, so that when the Israelites settled down in their camps, they didn't have to deal with the serpents, the scorpions, and the flying serpents. So in a sense, and we're not saying those are the 2 witnesses of Revelation, we're saying this is a possible additional layer. This is a possible additional side of the diamond of understanding 2 witnesses. Because if these 2 witnesses, because remember, the Ark of the Testimony the Ark of the Testimony. Adut, testimony, witnesses, right? It's the same word. And what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to witness to or testify to his word. And so in the Midrash, it was seen as these two darts or two flames of fire that would go out and take care of the serpents and the scorpions and so forth. So in that sense, they were two witnesses of the testimony, the Ark of the Testimony that held the tablets of testimony. So what is the fire doing? It's testifying to what's in the ark. I think that's what I've been trying to say. These two witnesses of fire that go out and destroy the enemy are witnessing to the power of what's in the ark, which is the power of the word. Right? So these are all great miracles. So as we look at the two witnesses of Revelation, they're kind of doing the same thing. They are witnessing to the word. And if anybody tries to harm them, then it says, they would send out fire and consume them. And that's, if anybody tried to attack them, they had to be killed in this way. That's interesting, in this way, not in a different way, this way. They had to be killed by fire, because I think for one reason, it grounds us back into the wilderness narrative, where the understanding is that the fire of the testimony, it did go out and it cleared the way for the Israelite encampment. So what would these two witnesses be doing if they're doing the same thing? If they're sending out fire of protection, then possibly what they're doing, they're preparing the camp to be able to dwell in the cloud, to be able to take on that full calling and purpose of being ministers of fire. Right? Here's the problem, though. Remember, this is what we said. There's a fine line between walking in the power of the Holy One and appropriating that power for your own purpose that he did not assign to you. He did not assign you that realm. That is not yours. That's what sorcery does. It delves into areas that are not assigned to us, and it can create some pretty spectacular things like serpents. Pharaoh's magicians were able to do that. And then in Revelation, we read here in Revelation 13, 12 through 15, that the beast can also perform this sign of fire. And I think that it makes it all the more interesting that Yeshua said it's a wicked and adulterous generation that seeks after a sign. Because I think the understanding is a sign has already been given to it. But so why are you still seeking? We are for the sign. We are for the sign. Somebody look that up if you know where I'm talking about. It keeps running away from my brain right now. But we are for a sign. And so why would you keep seeking a sign if we are the sign? But he says a wicked and adulterous generation wants to see a sign. They want to see something spectacular. And that's the danger of thinking you must feel the Holy Spirit, of thinking you must perceive the Holy Spirit, of thinking that you must witness something spectacular to know that God is alive. No, you don't. Because sometimes this spectacular sign is a deception. He's already given you the sign, that we are for the sign, that we have witnesses. We are witnesses to the Torah. The fact that we are witnesses to the Torah, that's the sign. That's the truth. Yeshua says, you're mad at me because I tell you the truth. You're not mad at me about the healing. You're not mad at me about the miracles. You're mad because I tell you the truth. Because these things are spectacular, not that they weren't helpful to the people who were healed, not that it didn't satisfy the hungry people with bread. It did. It was miraculous. It was spectacular. But the truth, that's what they're upset with. And so the sign is not always the thing to look for. It's to know what the true sign is, to know what the truth is. So as we are witnesses of the testimony, we can be like these two witnesses in the sense that we can breathe fire. we can breathe his word out and destroy the serpents and the scorpions. And that's what Yeshua said. You're going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to hurt you. Go back to the wilderness. Look at the pattern there in the wilderness. And this is the pattern I'm leaving for you. Don't be deceived by signs. And so here's what he says about the beast in Revelation 13:12. It says, he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who live on it worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. Okay, this is going to appear to be a sign. And then it says, he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of the sky to the earth in the presence of people. And he deceives those who live on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who live on the earth to make an image to the beast, who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause all who do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. All right, again, this is parallel. If you know the Jewish mindset of John's audience, they know about the golden calf. I don't know if this is accidental that we just had the fast of Tammuz yesterday, commemorating, among other things, the sin of the golden calf, right? But what happened? How did the magicians, Jannes and Jambres, if that's who really did instigate it, how did they get away with this deception? Well, the rabbis say that the calf actually did appear to come to life. Moses says, how did this happen? And Aaron gives a strange thing. Like, did he really think? Because after I thought about it, I was like, they got a point here. Because Aaron knows Moses well enough. He's not going to be deceived with a lie. The last person you want to lie to is Moses, other than the Holy One, right? After the Holy One, don't lie to Moses. And then the angel of the presence. But at this point, he wouldn't have really come into the picture yet as having the name in him and so forth. But Aaron, apparently with a perfectly straight face, turns to Moses and says, well, I threw the gold into the fire and boop, out pops the golden calf. Now, that was either the worst lie of all time, or it wasn't. There might have been an element of truth to it, because that's what they believe about this golden calf. It appeared to have breath, it appeared to come to life, and it appeared to even graze, like eat grass. I think that was in the Psalm, if I'm not mistaken. There's a Psalm about it, even eating grass. They chose to worship, a calf that ate grass, and they're connecting the dots here. That, well, it really did pop out, like it really did look like it was alive. And then in the Psalm, we're told it actually ate grass. So it had, if you wanted to believe that the golden calf was alive, you would see a sign that would tell you this calf was alive. And that's a little scary to think I would want to be deceived so much that I would actually think this inanimate object had life in it. But that's always the way the beast works. He'll give you dead stuff and tell you it's alive. That's what an addiction does. It's dead stuff and it tells you it's alive. And it's dead. But that animal soul inside of us, once it's addicted, it's difficult. And so you keep working, with the power of the Holy Spirit. What about somebody who's maybe a serial liar? We've all run into those before. They'll tell the lie when the truth would be easier. And they, at some point, know that's dead, but they'll think there's life in it. And that's why we keep doing stuff that will listen to the lie that there's life in this, when we know it's just destruction. And so this, I think, is going to be a place where we really should have drawn together. If we look back at the Israelites, what could have happened to stop this? If it really was just Jannes and Jambres really driving this whole thing, that's where the momentum came from, could we have not spoken into that before it gained the momentum? I don't know. But it just seems to me like if the Levites were willing to take up a sword against their brothers, maybe they could have also been able to stand beside their brothers at the time of the deception and say, don't believe it, don't believe it, don't believe it. Let me help you. Don't believe it. It's not real. It's not real. It's not breathing. It's not eating grass. It's not doing anything. It's not moving. Trust me, it's dead. And then if they didn't believe, they didn't believe. They make their own choices. But that if we're ministers of fire, we have to be willing, sometimes to just stand with people and say, don't fall for this. Don't fall for the feeling. Don't want this to be so true so badly that it seems to be true. And that's often what we do. When we make up our minds we want to do something, we want to do it so badly that we simply believe that our wrong thinking is true. And that's where the Holy Spirit comes in. Remember that fiery sword, the fire that would go out and kill the serpents and the flying serpents and the scorpions? You got to let the word fly in those situations. You speak the word, however you have to speak the word to yourself. You speak nice to yourself. You speak harsh to yourself. You speak however you have to speak that word, but you speak it over your own life and say, I will not be deceived by great signs of the beast. I will not be deceived by something that is dead, telling me it's alive. No matter how many times I have to tell myself this, right? I'll keep telling myself this. I will maintain this until I can see this beast for exactly what it is. It's dead. Right. And so it's a matter of sorcery. That's what's going on here. It's a matter of sorcery. There's a fine line between being a minister of fire and being a sorcerer. Right? Jannes and Jambres, they went out of Egypt, but they were sorcerers. Right? So we want to stay away from the sorcerers, and we want to stay close to those two witnesses of the fire of the word. So we've got this beast, and we know the first beast, of course, is the king of Babylon. If you'll remember, that's the golden head. But it also talks about how this last beast, he's performing signs in the presence of the first one. Well, the first one would be the king of Babylon, but the last beast would be some manifestation of Rome, or the red one. And they're going to put on demonstrations of invincibility. And this is going to include the ability to make fire fall from heaven. Now, in a rational, logical sense, could this be a modern missile that's scaring everybody? It could be. But remember, because it's sorcery, the deception is coming from the spirit realm. It might be that we're looking at this fire from the sky, whatever it happens to be, and we think, oh no, this fire is going to kill us all. But the truth is it's dead. It's a deception. It's coming from the realm of sorcery. And I see that frequently. It doesn't have to be fire falling from heaven. We're terrified of so many things now because the internet gives us a whole buffet of things to be scared of. Conspiracies, plagues, weapon systems, economic collapse, you name it. There's just, it's putting breath into dead things. Right? These things must happen. We know that in order for the final result to be brought about by the Holy One. But if we acknowledge he's pulling the levers and the switches, even though the sorcerers of the earth, the beasts of the earth, they think they're controlling the levers and the switches. They don't understand that they're being controlled. They're being brought to an end. Our job is to make sure that we're not looking at this buffet of death that's offered up every day in the news, on the internet, on the TV, and movies and songs. I don't care where you're getting the death buffet, but there's deception in it. There's sorcery in it that's coming from the spirit realm, even if it's coming through a physical vehicle that appears to have life in it. The deception is coming from the spirit realm. And so ultimately, this deception is going to appropriate holy things. And this takes us back to the last beast of Babylon, right? We know we start with Nebuchadnezzar, and then as we saw in the book of Daniel, Belshazzar. He was the last beast of Babylon. And we saw the prototype there of this feast that he calls, where he takes the holy vessels of the temple and he distributes them, and he's having a victory feast because of a military victory, they say, but also because of the date on which they say it was held, that he thought that the 70 years had been fulfilled, or the exile in Babylon. He thought that had been fulfilled. And now the 70 years has passed, and he says, well, see, it was just deception that the God of Israel was going to take you back so you could rebuild your temple. See, you're still under my control. I'm real and he's not. So I'm going to pass out the holy vessels just to prove to you that the vessels are under my control. Your God is powerless, and I am the image that you should bow down to. Right? So again, what's going on? It goes back to the arrogance of the king of Babylon that we read about in Isaiah. The deception is going to be that we are under subjection, that we have been placed under control. The beast will believe that we are under control. The beast will believe that the God of Israel is powerless to deliver his people. And those whom he deceives will also believe that there's no way home. What is he doing? Again, he's always deceiving, always deceiving. He's tapping into a realm that is not under his authority, never will be under his authority. In some cases, to bring this thing to its conclusion, we might see that in a certain case, he might actually be given permission to deceive for a certain season. But it's our job not to be deceived. What does it say? He has authority to deceive for so many months. But again, can he really deceive us? Who can he deceive? It has to be people who don't know the word. It has to be people who want to be deceived, who want to believe that the power of the beast is invincible, who want to believe that the Holy One will not protect them from whatever fire it is that the beast happens to be using to dazzle us with how powerful he is. So that's why we go back and we look at King Belshazzar, because we know if Israel dwelled in heavenly fire, then the beast is also going to look like he can manufacture this powerful fire. Whatever the nations perceived in Israel in the wilderness, whatever power they seemed to have, remember, it wasn't their power at all. They were not celestial beings. That was a misunderstanding. They were sons of Elohim, but they were not celestial beings. They were not gods. They were not divine. But see, you can see how the beast would perceive it that way. He's all about power and control. He's all about usurping the control of the Holy One. Right? But what's interesting here is we seem to be kind of hanging out in recent Torah portions, because at the time that Belshazzar has this unholy feast with the holy vessels, that's when he sees the writing on the wall. I had to lock him up. He was out of control.
You want me to leave him locked up?
No, you can take him out now. He's in timeout. Sorry. At any rate, the holy temple was desolate, and the beast, i.e. Belshazzar, he believed it would remain desolate, that everything was still under his control. But the handwriting on the wall said, you know what? Your kingdom is going to end this very night. It's going to happen fast. It's going to happen quickly. At the moment that we think the beast is invincible, and let's hope we're not thinking that. Let's hope we're not deceived by his supposed power. At the moment we think he's the strongest. It says, okay, this very night your kingdom's going to end. Just like Korach's rebellion. Remember, just like bam, in one day, Korach, all his cohorts, and then all the people who complained about it, bam, they're gone. And that's what it says in Revelation 18:8. It says, for this reason, in one day, her plagues will come, plague and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for the Lord who judges her is strong. Right? Elohim is the judge. Elohim is the judge. And so this Elohim, who is a judge with fiery ministering angels, what will be revealed is that the power of the beast was all a deception. It was all a matter of sorcery. And she's going to get burned up in one day. Plague. Is this what happened? Let's see, Torah portion before last, Korach, I think. That's what you have. You're going to see, you saw the people burned up with fire. You saw people killed with the plague. You saw the mourning for when Korach and the rebels went down into the earth, when the earth literally swallowed them up, which we see that in Revelation 2. All of these things are important. So let's review this right here. Revelation 13, 1-6. Saw the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. The beast that I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like those of a bear, his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been fatally wounded, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to wage war with him. Right? So that they don't think they think he's invincible. This is what they thought of Belshazzar. He's having this feast for a military victory. It seems like he's invincible. The day has passed. Passover has passed. And he says, bring out the holy vessels. The time has been fulfilled. And still, their God can't deliver them. They're still under my control. At the moment when they say, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him? All right, in 1 hour, in one day, everything is going to fall down, just like King Belshazzar. And remember, it was thought that he was killed by a fatal head wound. That's pretty cool. I mean, in terms of correlation, not the fact that he was killed by head wound. It says a mouth was given to him, speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. This is kind of what Daniel accuses Belshazzar of. Like, Belshazzar, you knew these things, and you did what you did anyway. He points it out. And it says, and he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. So those who dwell in heaven, those who dwell in the tabernacle, those who dwell in the Mishkan, the Sukkah, the Ohel Moed, this will still be a period where he has the authority to act for 42 months. But notice that in terms of his sorcery, he's not really permitted to harm those who are dwelling in heaven, those who are dwelling in the Sukkah. He can speak against them, but apparently he can hurt them no more than he could hurt God. He can blaspheme, but apparently that's all he can do. So what authority does he have? Well, he has authority to act for 42 months. He's given something specific. Nevertheless, it doesn't look like he can cross the realms. Like he's not actually allowed to go into that cloud and do harm. Because remember the two witnesses, it says fire comes out. Pow, pow. What is it doing? It's killing the serpent. It's killing the scorpions. It's killing the fiery serpent. And we see also the dragon is brought into this. Dragon, serpent, pretty much equivalent expression. So Revelation is taking us again, it's right back to the wilderness. But notice how fast the judgment came on the first beast kingdom, Babylon. When Belshazzar saw the writing on the wall, Daniel says, this night is coming. Your judgment is coming. You've been weighed in the scales and you have been found wanting. So Revelation 18:10, it says, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. In 1 hour. Revelation 18:17, for in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste, and every shipmaster and every passenger and sailor and all who make their living by the sea stood at a distance. And then you're up down to 19. And this is interesting because of the dust. It says they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, woe, woe, the great city in which all who had ships at sea became rich from her prosperity. For in 1 hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. Right? Pronouncing judgment, that is the Elohim aspect. And look how fast it happens. It's not a prolonged campaign. Once we see the writing on the wall, it's not going to be a prolonged campaign. In 1 hour, the judgment is going to come. In 1 hour, great wealth is laid waste. In 1 hour, that city is laid waste. The stronghold of the beast. Right? And remember the saints crying out from beneath the altar in Revelation? They said, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? And then they're told to wait for a little while and they're given a white robe. Well, right here, we can see the outcome. Rejoice over her, O heaven. Remember who dwells in heaven? Those who would be drawn to the Mishkan, those who would be drawn into the clouds of glory in the wilderness, those who would attend the Ohel Moed, those who would be drawn into the Sukkot of glory. It says, rejoice over her, O heaven. It says back here, that's exactly where they are. His tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven, his Mishkan. Those who walk in clouds of glory, right here. Rejoice over those. Rejoice over her, O heaven, you saints, apostles, and prophets. Who's in the cloud? And what are they carrying in the cloud? They're carrying the altar. Remember the Levites they had to carry the altar. It was a burning altar. Even when it was covered up, it was burning. And then those two fiery darts that would go out. Those two witnesses that would go out. He says, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. So it's going to happen very fast when it happens. And again, this economic collapse of the world creates the stage for Mashiach to come. Because remember, the rabbis say Mashiach will come when all measures are equal. In other words, when the economic system collapses to the point that everybody's equal, a rich man's money won't buy him anything. He'll be just the same as a poor person. We'll all be the same. And they say when that happens, when that economic collapse comes, then we can be fairly confident that Messiah is coming soon. Right, so going back to Belshazzar is the end of the first beast kingdom. Remember, he holds this blasphemous feast to celebrate a victory in battle, celebrating that he has subjugated the holy vessels of Israel, which remember, those holy vessels stand for people. Those holy vessels stand for Israel. In the same way, and remember, this is a blasphemy and this is a deception, because if you attended this feast and you drank from those vessels, then you were being deceived into thinking that Babylon held the power. But then Daniel comes along and interprets the writing on the wall, and very quickly the judgment comes. So in Revelation, we see the counterpart. We see that which is authentic, where the true power lies, where the true spiritual authority lies. And in this case, he's going to serve the king of Babylon, all the way from the golden head to the iron and clay feet. Now the beast is going to be the main dish. It says in Revelation 19:11, I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True. And in righteousness, he judges and wages war. See the judge there? It's the Elohim aspect, and wages war. His eyes are a flame of fire. Well, remember, there's two eyes, typically. I know the living creatures have a few more, but Yeshua, we would expect him to have two eyes. They're a flame of fire. So there again, those two fiery darts that the rabbis talk about that would go out and destroy the serpents and the scorpions. It's the same description of Yeshua. His eyes are a flame of fire. Where is he going out from? Apparently from the heavenly altar, and he's going to avenge the blood of those who dwell in the tabernacle, whose souls have been stored under the altar. This is on his head are many crowns, and he has a name written on him which no one knows except himself. He is clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. How are you going to prevent yourself from being deceived by a beast that appears to breathe and be in control and be spectacular and appear to pretty much do anything the Holy One could? You better know the Word of God. And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, were following him on white horses. Sounds an awful lot like the saints under the altar who were given those white robes and told to wait a little while. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. And on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I don't know how much you know about the ancient Near and Middle East, but quite frequently the kings would refer to themselves as a king of kings. They wanted to be known as a king of kings. And it has to do with like the vassals and so forth. If you've done the ancient Near East studies, maybe you're familiar with that. But this expression, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, we know that this is the authentic title of Messiah. It never belonged to Nebuchadnezzar. It never belonged to Belshazzar. It never belonged to Darius. It never belonged to Cyrus. We have the true King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It says, then I saw an angel standing in the sun. Remember, the angels, they have principalities and powers, and often the physical object represents that principality, like the planets. And he cried out with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in mid-heaven, come, assemble for the great feast of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings and the flesh of commanders, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, both free and slaves, and small and great. And this takes you all the way back to Egypt. He says, I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Right? So there's about to be a war, but it's not really going to be much of a war at all, because the birds are being told, the carrion birds, come on and assemble. Belshazzar had a feast and his kingdom ended that very night. This beast kingdom is going to think he has won. He's going to assemble for a victory. And what's going to happen? His military is not going to be as strong as he thought it was, because basically in a very short period of time, let's say this very night, your kingdom's going to end, in 1 hour, your destruction is going to come very quickly. He will go from feasting to being the feast. Okay, so just let's go back to our verse again, kind of get recentered. Song of Songs 3:6. What is this coming up from the wilderness, like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the scented powders of the merchant? Do you see there even the contronym of merchandise? Because see, Babylon was known for its merchandise. All the merchants of the earth mourned over her because of the physical goods with which they could traffic human souls. But who's coming up from the wilderness? It's the 12 tribes of Israel, the scented powders of the merchant. What does that mean? It means they're coming from the 4 corners of the earth, but they're coming with the dust of Jacob. They're coming with the power of blessing. The holy vessels are coming up, in other words, coming up from the wilderness. And so what had passed itself off as real, see, all the wealth of the world, there's nothing that'll get you more excited than stuff, right? Because that stuff makes you feel alive, but it's only for a short time and then you lose interest. No matter what it is, no matter how wonderful it is, if we're talking about stuff, things, the wealth of Babylon, it'll make you feel good for a little while, but then you have to have it again. Not all addictions are with substances. Some addictions are with purchasing. How many people are over their head in credit card debt right now? How many people have bought houses they can't afford to pay for? We can be addicted to all manner of things in the realm of Babylon. But how do we know what's authentic? Well, the scented powders of the merchant, those are the authentic ones coming up from the wilderness. They have been deprived of everything. Imagine what it would have been like. He gives you manna to eat. You don't have to garden. You don't have to shovel. You don't have to dig. You don't have to plow. You don't have to thresh. They really didn't have to bake, boil, and grind. They could have just eaten it. He's going to make every provision. And the ones coming up from the wilderness are going to be those who are satisfied with that provision, with that daily bread. They're not going to be lusting after cucumbers and watermelons and fish and garlic and onions and all that. They're going to say, give me this day my daily bread. And they're going to be happy when that's what they get. They don't need to leave with a bunch of stuff because they're not attached to the stuff and the feeling that comes with it. They are attached to the word of Adonai. And when you're attached to the word of Adonai, then the feelings become authentic and true and based on the spirit of truth. All right, so I know we're getting close to the end here, and I would hate to cut this off in the middle, but we might have to. All right, just to review, the columns of smoke You're going to have the pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud, incense offerings, and then the outer altar of smoke. Myrrh and frankincense. These are the spices of the altar sacrifices. So they're going to be connected to the altar. And yes, they smell good, but they're also connected to judgment. These people have been purified. They have been through the judgment in the wilderness. They have been purified. They have put themselves on the altar, and now the souls are under the altar, awaiting the resurrection, pretty much. And then it says, with the scented powders or avocat of the merchant. And they say that this is the dust that resulted from Jacob's wrestling match at the Yavuk River. And he's returning his, at this point, it would have been 11 sons to their inheritance after his exile with Laban. And so it's from Avak, right? Dust, powders, same root word. And so this wrestling match is going to be Avak, the verb Avak. And there's the play on word with the dust and the powders. So they believe, and like I say, I'm not completely married to this, and I don't expect you to be either, but tomorrow we're going to look at some interesting things surrounding this idea and see if it can't show us some good information, again, to help us see how the dust of Jacob is going to be extremely important, again, going into the book of Revelation and this return, this coming up from the wilderness. But the rabbis do believe that this angel that Jacob wrestled with was Esau's angels, his ministering angel. And they believe that's why it looks so much like him. Because later, what does Jacob do? He sees Esau and he says, oh, wow, it's like the face of God. But now that we know the different definitions of Elohim, we're going to see that maybe he doesn't specifically mean the face of Elohim, God, the creator. He might mean the face of Elohim, this angel that he wrestled with, this appointed minister. Because what's interesting about this angel that he struggled with is that he had to depart at daybreak. And daybreak, we know, symbolizes the end of the exile. Esau's ministering angel will have power for an appointed time. And it's our job as sons of Jacob, as the dust of Jacob, as the sons of Elohim, to wrestle with Esau's angel. It's our job to wrestle with the beast. But that does hold a key, right? So here's the actual text. And like I say, we'll unpack this a little more carefully tomorrow. But the passage is right here in Genesis 32:26. It says, then he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have contended with God. And so that word there, Elohim, but we're not given capital letter, small letter. Hebrew is not like that. So we have to know from context whether Jacob had a wrestling match with Elohim, the creator, all night, or whether he had a wrestling match with an Elohim, a judge, an appointed minister, a deputy. You have contended with Elohim and with men and have prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God. Again, that word is Elohim, face to face. Yet my life has been spared. All right. So is Jacob saying, I've literally seen Elohim the creator? And is the angel saying, you have literally wrestled with Elohim the creator? That doesn't sound survivable. But what if he has contended with an Elohim, small e, with an appointed minister of Elohim? And what if he has seen the face of an appointed minister of Elohim? And he says, yet my life has been spared. So we don't know whether he literally did see Elohim face to face, the creator. But we do have this later on in Exodus 33:20. Adonai says, you cannot see my face, for mankind shall not see me and live. So we have apparently two conflicting scriptures here. And so in the good old days, we would just pick one. We would just say, no, I believe this way. I believe he saw God himself. Or we'd say, no, I don't believe he saw God himself. We would think it was an either or proposition. But see, when you run into scriptures like that bump into one another and you don't know how to reconcile them. And so in frustration, you just pick up, interpretation. You don't have to do that. Again, you can go back into the context and say, is it possible that both of these things are true? How is it possible? Well, I think Jacob clears it up. We keep reading. That's what you do. When you can't reconcile two verses, you keep reading until you find more. Genesis 33:10, Jacob said, no, please. He's talking to Esau here. If now I have found favor in your sight, then accept my gift from my hand, for I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Right? So, who did Jacob wrestle with? If he's wrestling with an appointed angel, then perhaps it explains why he sees Esau the next day and he says, wow, it's like I have seen the face of Elohim. Is he talking about Elohim the creator or this angel that he wrestled with all night that looks so much like Esau? And that's what they say about ministering angels, is they will look a lot like you, that each person has a ministering angel and he looks a lot, or she, I don't know what they are. They resemble you in some way. And it would also explain why you cannot see my face, for mankind shall not see me and live. But if you see his appointed messenger, then you have seen his will. You have seen the expression of his will. And that's what Jacob says, I see your face as one sees the face of Elohim. So, we'll pick up there tomorrow and dig a little further into the New Testament to see if there's more verses in the New Testament that can again clarify what just happened here when we kicked up the dust of Jacob with this wrestling match. And I think just knowing the context of Elohim versus Elohim, I think it clears up the question. Reading into the context, whether we're reading Elohim the creator or whether we're reading Elohim an appointed judge, an appointed minister, an appointed, we might say prince, what they call it, Prince of Persia, ruler, an appointed ruler of a particular realm. And I thought it's interesting too, I'll stop share, but going back, we were talking about sorcery working in a realm that you're not authorized to be in. Back in Revelation 13, it says, who is like the beast, who is able to wage war with him. A mouth was given to him, speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. It doesn't say that Adonai gave him that authority. That's a detail that can be very important, because if this authority kind of goes back to the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and a great authority, because otherwise it would sound like Elohim gave him the authority to blaspheme Elohim and those who dwell in heaven. And Elohim gave him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies and authority to act for 42 months. The text doesn't really read like that. When we read it closely, it sounds as if, because it doesn't make sense for Elohim to give him authority to blaspheme. I guess he could. He's Elohim. If it serves his purpose, he certainly could. But it seems to me like that particular authority is coming from the dragon. And he's working outside heavenly authority when he does it. He's working under the dragon's authority, but not heavenly authority. And therefore it would be sorcery. Because this is what, remember, this is what Balak wanted Balaam to do. To curse what was not cursed. He was asking him to act outside of his authority. He says, I'm asking you to do it. I, Balak, am asking you, Balaam, to do this. He didn't have any, I mean, you've gone through that Torah portion enough to know Adonai never gave him permission to curse Israel. He never got that authority. He got the authority, conditional, to go with the people, even though he had already told him don't do it. But if you persist, then I'm going to turn it into a blessing. But he really did not have authority to curse Israel. In the same way, I don't really see the beast having the authority, heavenly authority, to blaspheme Israel. If we're trying to connect it to that Torah portion.